Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Career Expert Roundtable. I am Bill, the company's expert, and I am joined once again by Abby from Life Work Challenge Balance, not Life Work Challenge, Life Work Balance. Go check out her channel. And Amri Celeste. Amri
Hello.
Celeste from Interview. Was it Interview Coach? Is
Yes,
there's
that's
more
the
to
name
it?
of my
Yes.
yeah. Amri Celeste
Go
interview
check out
coach.
her channel. There are links in the description. And the title of this episode is How to Find a Job When Hiring Slows. This is our sixth episode. So welcome to everybody watching. And we're going to be taking questions at some point. So if you see our beautiful faces, you should see a chat box somewhere nearby. Get in the chat wherever you're watching this. This is being live streamed to multiple places, and ask us, react if you have a reaction to what we're talking about, and ask us any questions or what you're struggling with or wondering about, and we will try to help you out. So there we go.
Yes, and this topic is really relevant right now because we're kind of moving into the end of the year and there's holiday season, and so hiring might feel like it's starting to slow down. My kind of word of advice is don't give up yet, because there's actually a big push for hiring usually at the beginning of the year. So the hiring
Yes.
process is still important now to the end of December, because a lot of jobs are going to be looking to begin starting in January. So even though it might feel like it's slowing down, it's still a good time to apply. There's also
Yes,
maybe some hiring freezes that are occurring in layoffs. So hopefully all this information is still pretty relevant.
definitely.
All right. So
Yep.
I think one of the kind of first places that we can start is if it seems like hiring is starting to slow down and you're wanting to start to branch out, there's this thing called transferable skills. So Amri, when you work with clients, when it comes to the recruiting process, it seems
Yep.
like transferable skills is probably something that you talk to them about. Is this something that you help people work through relatively often?
Well, it comes up normally if somebody is switching industries, or they want to start something new, and they kind of think, oh, I don't have any of the skills. They normally have some skills that could transfer, unless it's something drastically different. So that's normally how it would come up. And so yeah, I might work with them on their specific skill sets, and work with them on how they can find and identify those transferable skills. Yeah, so I might kind of work with them and look at things like their previous skill sets. I'd say the easiest way, if it's just kind of one easy tip, is using your resume. So if you have a resume already, just using your resume to go through and identify the skill sets that you have on there, the qualifications that you have on there, any certifications or courses that you completed, anything that you've achieved, and also people forget about things like volunteer work. So or extra work. So things that they've done at work where they'll say, oh, I also did this charity day 4 times a year. And they totally forget that they did that. They're like, oh, we used to join a call and coach students in a local school. I completely forgot about that. And that could be, and maybe the role they want is in the charity sector. That's a real life example, by the way, that somebody completely forgot about. And I was like, that's great. And we decided to work through that and say, okay, what did you do? What did you coach them on? See if you can find the framework that you used, and we can work that into your CV. So yeah, personal projects, and also feedback. Sometimes people in your life can spot your skills easier than you can. So saying to people, what kind of things do you think I'd be suitable for? And they'll tell you. Like, someone's said to me recently, oh, have you tried life coaching? It never would have crossed my mind. And they had to point out why they thought that. And although it didn't appeal to me, I was like intrigued to know more. So asking for feedback from people, and then just making a list, ideally like a list of categories. And then if you're not sure what you want to do, you can look at roles that fall into each of those categories.
Yes.
Well,
And so
the volunteer thing is very, very useful because I like it because it's like it really it's a rare moment of honesty. You see what the person is really interested in doing because they're doing it of their own accord. There's no compensation really, like in a traditional sense, to speak of, that motivates people to do this kind of activity. So you're really getting a glimpse into who the person is and what particular thing interests them. Maybe they're into people, maybe they're into a good cause, maybe they're into the actual work itself. You really get to see, some insight into into who they are. And as opposed to asking them about something to do with the job where it could be fabricated, it could be exaggerated, you really don't know, right? So the volunteer stuff, I think, is really great to have on your resume and to really explore in interviews too.
Yeah. And typically when it comes to job postings, there's like that little sentence at the end of each job posting, which is like other duties as applies. And like that just opens the door to a bunch of other skills that you might need to use when it comes to the specific job. So when you're looking at a new job, it might be through a slightly different lens than the job that you're currently in. And so it's very rare that you take a job and you only do the things that are on those like bullet pointed lists of your job posting. So there's likely other projects and tasks and responsibilities that will somehow get on your plate. And so even keeping track of that in your current job, if you're not looking actively for a new one, is a great way to then start to identify some of those transferable skills.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree. And in terms of, I'd say, you can, in terms of marketing those skills, I think that's a really key part as well, is sometimes it's, oh, I've got all these new skills, and then they're added in a tiny corner somewhere on page 4 of a resume that no one will ever see it. So just making sure that you're putting it
page 4 of the resume. Yeah.
I mean, I put that red flag in there as a test to see if you pick it up. So, but yeah, but make sure everything matches. Make sure your resume matches your socials, your LinkedIn, your CV, your resume, and also when you go to apply, make sure that the skills that are most relevant for that role are most prominent on your resume. And I know it's not always possible if you're applying for a wide range, but if you are targeting a specific areas, which I mentioned, which I recommend, then it's good to make sure that those skills are front and center.
Yeah. And I think one of the quick ways to do that is through using ChatGPT or another AI program. Like, I love working smarter, not harder. And so if you could just copy and paste the job posting and say, like, what are the top 5 skills that, are relevant for this job or most important for this job? And then that can give you an idea of some, special language and keywords you can then really highlight on your resume when you're going through that process.
Are there any limits on that type of activity in ChatGPT? I know for certain types of queries that you ask it will say, like, you've reached your quota for the day or for the week or whatever it is. Is when you paste the entire job posting in and then you ask it a question and say, can you rephrase this to do whatever? Is that something, do you know that, Abby? Like, I'm not a super ChatGPT aficionado.
I still use the free version. I don't even pay for the paid version of it. And there have been just a couple of times I've reached that limit. And usually it's just for a time frame. Like, you get to, reaccess it in 3 hours or whatever that might look like. And so I would say that if you find yourself reaching that limit regularly, then it might be worth it to pay for the month or, 3 months while you're going through your job search process. But in most cases, I find that, I might ask it a question, then I'll go into my own documents and make some tweaks and things like that. And then I'll come back to it. And so I don't use all of the power that I'm given in that single sitting. But definitely is possible.
Yeah, well, it's a very useful tool. I mean, I know it has an input for, not to go off on a tangent or anything, but I know it has an input for attaching files, right? So if you are like what you just said, Abby, you take the entire job posting and then you paste it into the ChatGPT prompt. I know that people can, they can paste it in as a file where you attach the file. I think that might have the limit on it. Like, whenever I've encountered the limit, it's always when you're attaching a file. So for people who don't know, I mean, hopefully everybody knows this, but you can just copy the body of the text and just paste it directly into the prompt. And then possibly you're not hitting limits, like daily limits on your usage or something. Anyway, just my amateur 2 cents.
That's really, I didn't know that's really important. I didn't realize that I haven't used the free version in a while. So it's such a strange thing saying a while because it still feels brand new. So this time 3 years ago, never heard of ChatGPT, but yeah, it's that's really interesting. I know you can also paste images in. Sometimes when I'm being lazy, if you just copy a screenshot and add it in, I assume it's probably the same limit that you'll hit because it sounds like it's probably based on attachments. But yeah, I've
never even tried that. That's, I think, one of the things that you get with the more paid version, the fuller version. Anyway,
okay.
So you obviously have the paid version. Did you notice a a massive difference in the amount of features or the usability when you
At
paid
the
version?
time, I'm trying to remember. I think at the time, were we on GPT-3? I think when I started to pay, and I think I did notice it was faster. And I also didn't have, because it was new then. You regularly would go there and it would say, "Oh, it's at its limit." This, and I was like, "Oh no, I really want to get on there." And then when you pay, you suddenly those limits have disappeared, and those number of people aren't on there anymore. So yeah, I think at the time that was the main difference. Whereas now the differences would probably be quite like vast. So for example, I have access to the new updated versions that are a little more kind of, they say like human thinking is kind of how it's marketed, and it thinks a little more and it's a little more human. It was, as usual, a little scary when you see how natural some of the things are. But yeah, I don't know if that's in the free version. I imagine it probably isn't. So
Okay. Well, anyway, as always, I think we all are united on this. If you're not using ChatGPT, just the free version at least, it's an incredibly useful tool for multiple things you've got to do or that you need to do for this process. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, and, we talked about analyzing the job posting for identifying those skills. You could also analyze your resume. So like, based on my resume, what do you think are the top 10 transferable skills? And then based off of those skills, what types of industries and jobs would those skills fit into? So you can just use it kind of as a brainstorming tool, which can be really helpful. So I think identifying transferable skills is like one of the biggest things to do when it comes to a slowing job market, because once you recognize what those transferable skills are, then you can really broaden your search. And typically broadening your search isn't as helpful. You want to be a little bit more focused, but when things start to slow down, you're not getting any responses, widening it a little bit can always be a little bit more helpful. One of the other topics that we had talked on or touched on during our planning process was how to boost our current skill set. And so that's like identifying areas where you might, have some gaps or some areas to get some certification and education. Bill, do you have any like experience working with people in your past and in your current role when it comes to like best practices for boosting their skill set or identifying that?
I think a lot of it, I mean, I'm not too familiar with sort of, standard online platforms like LinkedIn courses and things like that maybe when you mention them across the board, people would be aware of them. They'd have some awareness for them. I found that stuff is very industry specific. So if there's some industry specific, certification or qualification, like if you work in, I don't know, just some area of industry, maybe some industry specific safety certification or quality or, something like that, or a very specific skill. The problem with those is that if you are, like you mentioned, changing careers or going into a different area, it doesn't have the wide recognition that maybe something like, like, I don't know, LinkedIn courses or something might. Like if you say I took a LinkedIn course, maybe I think recruiters across the board would be more familiar with that, but it may not be, something that's just specific to your industry. So, I mean, now that I say this, it kind of forms the question in my mind. When you're talking about how to boost your skill set, would you recommend industry specific skills or more generalized skills like in, say, leadership or management or something, or something very specific like technical skills in a particular industry?
What do you think, Amri?
I think it depends on what you want to do. So for each of those examples you gave, the answer, I would say yes. So if you, for example, I have a friend who's been in finance. She wants to move into my world, which is HR. I have warned her, but she still wants to do it. So I've suggested, first of all, she's decided to do the HR qualification. And although you don't really need that, it is a really competitive job market. So she wanted to do that. And I said to her, you can ask your employer to fund it. She didn't even consider that, because you can actually ask them if they'd be willing to do that. And I also told her that if you can find a remote job that you can do as volunteer work during COVID, it seems like there were loads of them, just loads of volunteer work in that area. I said, if you can put that on your CV, I said, one thing that HR managers, heads of HR love when they're interviewing people coming into the industry. They love when they've done volunteer work and they've done their CIPD. they almost don't see that you haven't done anything in the field. So it's, that might be a slight exaggeration, but it really helps, like in large volumes. So things like that are relevant. Same with technical skills. So for example, I once did a diversity course on LinkedIn because where I was working at the time, they were focusing on that, and it was a kind of a big thing at the time. And I put it on my CV, my resume, but I didn't say it was a LinkedIn course. I've just said it was a diversity course that covered these modules. And it's because, not like you say, not everybody's going to know what that is. In my industry, everybody knows what LinkedIn is, but there didn't seem like any specific reason to reference that. So I would say it really depends on what you want to do. If you're changing careers, then it's tricky because it depends on what you want to do. You just need to look into the skill sets that are most commonly required in that industry. So just look at job posts. What's most commonly required? Look at 3 or 4 or a few more if you can. Compare what is most commonly requested. Do you have those skills, and how can you go about doing it? How long would it take you? And one other thing also is I'm kind of big on soft skills because I think that that's an area where a lot of candidates struggle, and it's where they kind of fall down, and where they, you'll have 2 candidates with the same skill set on paper, and one of them has better soft skills. And by that, I mean things like communication or problem solving, things that are subjective. So you might think you're a great communicator. Your parents might think you're a great communicator. A local member of a religious organization might think you're a fantastic communicator. But does the person interviewing you for the job think that? And if you have identified that that's something, then that's something for you that you can do. That's a soft skill, and you can get loads of free. I wouldn't even necessarily say you need. I'd say there's probably free courses that you can find. So even platforms like Skillshare. I don't know if they still do free trials, but they used to do free trials on a regular basis. If you can get a free trial on that, and you can do a communication course on that, then list what you achieved from doing that course, and problem solving, another soft skill, things like that, things that puzzles or things that challenge you to find solutions, and then noting down what you learned.
Yes. And kind of along those lines, I think would be like professional associations or affiliations and conferences. So being able to list like these professional development organizations that you're somewhat involved with. So, you had mentioned HR here in the United States, like SHRM is one of those things that a lot of people will post like their SHRM certification letters after their name. And so another thing that you could do if you're looking to see what sorts of certifications or trainings you could take that would make you more marketable and more competitive is search the people who are doing the jobs that you want to apply to. Look at their LinkedIn profile and see what they've got listed. Maybe they have letters after their names. Look at what those letters mean. Maybe they have certain certifications or trainings that they've taken listed towards the bottom of their LinkedIn profile. Check those out too, because those might be not necessarily listed on the job posting, but something that could say, hey, this person has gone the extra mile to get training or education in this area, even though it's not something we require or even knew we preferred. We're feeling a little bit more biased towards hiring this person because they have that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like the safe choice would be the soft skills because, I don't know. It's like, we've talked about this before where someone applies for the job and they have something that's not explicitly mentioned in the job requirements. I mean, how much weight does that really carry, And I think as far as I can imagine, I think the only thing I can come up with that would be an exception would be like common soft skills like leadership skills or management skills or communication skills, stuff like that. Like for example, like I've got on the wall here, one of those, the yellow one is Z462 electrical safety training. Now that's like how to work on electrical high voltage equipment that's live. Now, if that's not specifically mentioned, like you require this certification or this training for a job, how much weight would that really carry? Like for you guys, like when you assess, I would venture a guess that it doesn't really matter that much. Like it would be like, okay, it's good that you're trying to improve yourself, so you get some points for doing the self-improvement thing. But specifically that skill, if you're not familiar with it and it's not mentioned as a requirement, I would say it probably wouldn't be super valuable. So maybe more generalized communication skills, leadership skills. You mentioned diversity, the things that are more like sort of
Mhm.
recognized across the board. That would probably be a better way to go. What do you guys think of that?
Yeah, well, I think that when it comes to your resume, when you're applying to a job, it should be tailored to the job that you're applying to, and you should only be including relevant information for that job. So if I'm applying
Yeah.
to an HR role and I've taken a training in electrical whatever,
Hmm.
it's not relevant to my HR role. So it's just going to take up this valuable real estate on my resume that I could probably use in a more effective way. So I would
Yeah.
not include something that's not relevant to the job that I'm applying to. But I'm going to kind of answer your question with a question for both of you, which is how do you both feel about seeing a skills section on the resume where it's like bullet points of those soft skills?
It depends. I feel like this is not a way to wiggle out of answering, because I say that to answer every question. I'm like, well, it depends, but it really does. So if it's, let's say it's a customer services role and the manager says to me, I want someone who's going into their first job. They might not have all the, and then that section is very valuable with soft skills in it. But if it's somebody who is mid to senior level in their career and they're taking up space in the skills section with good communication, great at answering the phone, then I'm like, no, don't, just, so it really depends. But in most cases, I would go for relevancy over anything else. But I know there are some odd cases, like for example, in sales, there was a period of time where if you, a job description wouldn't ask whether or not you'd ever started your own business or whether you'd read books. But if you were to mention certain sales books, certain sales trainers, or that you had an entrepreneurial spirit, it worked. It could put you over the top. So although there are caveats, in most cases, I would agree with you, Abby, on relevancy, almost always relevancy, unless in the odd circumstance here or there.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. I mean, if you're at a certain level, listing basic things as skills, yeah, that's kind of a bit silly. But I don't have a problem with the skills section, but I do think that if it's something that you're going to be actively looking for, it should be prominent wherever it is. So either it's highlighted or it's boldened or something so it jumps out. Like if it's something you don't want it to be in a sea of other random things, you want it to be grouped in a section that's logical, right? So I think it could work, but it has to be prominent if it's relevant and if you want people to notice it, I think is the bottom line.
And I usually recommend that people don't include a skills section on their resume just because it's mostly subjective. Like you were
Yeah.
saying, Amri, I might think that I'm a really great communicator and my parents might think I'm a really great communicator, but does my boss think I'm a great communicator? And what do I have to back that up? So instead of wasting that like valuable space on my resume with just like subjective skills, I would much rather eliminate that section completely and give myself extra space to be able to explain how I'm a great communicator through, demonstrating the results that I've achieved and what types of groups I've worked with and how many people I've managed, having more quantifiable data associated with communication and conflict resolution rather than just listing, in bullet point form, the skills that I think I have.
If you did say hypothetically take a course in, I don't know, communication or something, would you prefer that to be listed under education, under like, qualifications, and you list the courses you've taken? Is that where you would want that?
Probably. Yeah. So I might have like an education section where it's like more academic education. Then I might have like trainings and certifications as a different section where I would then list out specific trainings I've done. But I wouldn't have just a, generic skills section. I would want to include a little bit more oomph behind whatever that is.
See, I do like a skills section. I have to say, I do like a skills section. This is where it gets interesting. I do. I'm thinking of my own profession in recruitment because there are so many specifics, and it's the same with other industries as well, where and HR in general, there are certain types of things that differentiate different types of recruiters, and it's an easy way for people to see that you've done. So like, for example, D&I or anything diversity, some companies really want that, some don't. Have you project management within recruitment? Like, I'm going to give a super technical term, like an ATS implementation project. It's actually really, really common, but it's something someone can see right at the top, and there's no recruiter that reads through every line of your CV, unless they have absolutely nothing to do and, they only have 2 people apply for the job, they just don't do that. So that skills section, and also the other key thing is systems. That section is really valuable for systems where people want to know, have you used this system? Have you used that system? Particularly in my profession in HR, I've seen it's particularly in technical skills. Do you have these technical skills? That skills section is key. It can be, in my experience, it can be just as effective without that. But I just know that thinking about the way that I and many recruiters I know actually read through CVs, if there's an extra section, we'll scan it, but we won't necessarily read everything. So if you've got key systems that are relevant, key certain projects and things that are highly relevant, I put it in the skills section and then work it into where I've used it in the body of the resume, in the body of each job. So I do like a skills section, but it could just be that I've done it for so long that it's just a habit. But
well, and I think that's where we can even get more into the weeds, right? Because I think there's the skills section where it's like the soft skills, which are very subjective. And then there's the technical skills. Now, if there's a technical skills section, then I am all for that because it's a little bit more measurable. If I say that I have experience with Python, then you'll be able to tell if I do or I don't. Whereas if I say I'm a good communicator, that is up to whoever I'm communicating with to determine that.
You're a great communicator, by the way, just to throw that out there.
We all have some good practice with that, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Go ahead, Bill.
Oh, no, I was just agreeing. I was just looking at what else was in this section here. So it's within the context of when hiring is slowing down, you're trying to make yourself more competitive. And we each have slightly differing advice about, technically how to do this and that. If you wanted to find the commonality and the takeaways from all this, I was just trying to think what that would be, whether you have a skill section, whether you don't have a skill section, and what are the types of things you should put on there and make sure are prominent. So it would be, I think we all kind of agreed that it was relevant to the position. So whatever you choose to take, that's the number one thing. Make sure it's relevant to the position, because just sort of taking a random thing, personally, I don't think like whether or not I value it or not, I don't think it's valued by most recruiters and stuff and most hiring managers. They just, wow, you took a course. Great. It has to be something that they already associate with, like, wow, that would be a nice thing for someone to have in this role. Right. So either it's explicitly stated or it's something that's so general and so well known that no one's going to really challenge you or consider it irrelevant, Yeah.
Well, and I think that that's also why a cover letter is so important, because my resume only tells part of the story. And I think a cover letter gives applicants the opportunity to tell a deeper story and really demonstrate how they have some of those skills and transferable skills that will help them be successful in a role if they haven't done it before. And a lot of the people that I work with cringe because they're like, I don't want to spend the extra time and energy writing a cover letter. And I think that that's really what can differentiate you between a different candidate who has very similar skill sets. And so your resume isn't necessarily the place to go into a lot of that detail, but a cover letter is. And I also know.
I see. Sorry if I'm interrupting. I just see that Prashant asked a question, says, hi all, I have a good technical skills, but I lack in communication skills. How can I improve it? I think we kind of touched on that.
I think when it comes to improving communication skills, like this is a lifelong learning process. Like no one is like, I've achieved level 100 of communication and I'd have nowhere else to go. We all have areas of communication that we can improve on. And so I think recognizing that maybe your weakness or an area of growth for you is communication gives you some incentive to start to practice that. So there are probably some self-help books that you can read. If your communication is more like presentation skills, there's things that you can do with that. Here in the United States, we have Toastmasters, where it's like a group that will meet regularly where you can practice your presentation skills. You might choose to read some conflict resolution books. Maybe you do some, in-depth training classes where you focus on communication. Just being aware of it is step number one. And then proactively choosing to do something about it.
Yeah, Toastmasters is all over the world, and I recommend that too. I think that if you're just starting out and you might have social anxiety when you have to meet people, like say in a job interview, that type of situation, you're meeting a stranger, the pressure's on, you're out of your comfort zone, you're on somebody else's turf, that gives you the fear, and then that impacts your performance. Toastmasters is definitely a thing that can help with that.
Yeah.
Check it out. There's a website. I think it's toastmasters.org, something like that. But just practice. Practice makes perfect. Learn the theory. You can get that off the internet, off YouTube, off any number of sources, and then practice. It's not simply a matter of like learning what to do. You have to actually go out and start implementing these when you talk to people on the street, when you talk to people at the store, when you talk to people at work or at school. And the more of that you do, the better you will get. And as Abby said, it takes years and years, and you improve and you improve and you get better. And pretty soon you're going to be a pro at it.
Yeah, I also, one question I would have, it's something that you mentioned, Abby, about the area is probably one of the first things I would recommend is identifying which area of communication you're struggling with. Because, for example, I didn't know this when I started out my channel, but I have a lot of people watching my channel who are learning to speak English. And so when they were saying I'm struggling with communication, they meant something completely different to I'm nervous, or, it was also affecting their interview skills, but, they were asking about accents and things like that, and elocution, and then I started to look into, there were channels dedicated to helping people learn English in the context of an interview. So there's my channel ended up partially falling into that category just because of the way that I read the answers and things. I just noticed when people started to contact me for sponsorships, when they were all places that taught people to speak English, and I was like, that's a strange pattern. But that's who was in my audience. So just identifying what your challenge is with communication is key, and then you can double down on that. So like you said, Abby, is it presentation skills? Is it, speaking too fast or slow? Is it pronunciation? Is it the language as a whole? Is it just confidence? And so just narrowing down to that specific area, because sometimes people don't realize that there is so much within that specialism that you can learn. But once you've identified it, it's easy to then find something on that topic.
Yes.
Yeah. If you're learning a second language or something, and English is not your native language, what can help? I mean, what helped me? I'm bilingual. I speak French. What helped me was watching TV in the language that you're trying to learn. So you're immersing yourself in it, even if you're not actually out in public talking to somebody in the language, but just, you're at home, whatever, just trying to immerse yourself. And then this might sound kind of weird, but if you're listening to a news or something in that language, try replying, try talking to yourself in that language. And then what really helps, obviously, is having somebody who speaks the language with the accent that you're going for, either their native speaker, and then having them give you some feedback. I don't know. It's like what we're kind of doing with the three of us just connecting on YouTube. It seems like it's almost possible. It might be possible to do some kind of live stream YouTube based solution for that. You connect with somebody and, they give you some pointers on, getting that honest feedback is hard because you have to tell somebody, you're saying this word wrong, So,
yeah. But there is somebody I came across a couple of years ago who just reads the news to teach English, literally like reading the this is the latest on, something exciting and interesting, like a celebrity trial, or this is what's
there you go. And it's also fun too.
The news and helping people to learn that way. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I think that also is step one, like identifying what part of communication, because we could say, my weakness is communication. Well, we've just talked about probably 5 different areas of communication that are very different.
Yeah. Big topic. Very big topic.
Yep. All right. So I'm looking at our notes as well. And I think the next step is to kind of start talking about how to tailor your search to the current market. So how do we identify companies in a strategic way to, say, okay, they're probably recession proof, or they're not going to go through a hiring freeze. There are always positions open. Amri, do you have any suggestions when it comes to how to tailor that search to the current market?
I think if we're talking about not so much transferring, but just when hiring slows down, most of my tips are very similar to what they are when hiring does not slow down. And the reason I say that is because no matter how many times I've said something, I still have the same queries day after day, week after week, year after year. And the reason is that as I'm interviewing people, I'm noticing that the majority of people don't actually cover the basics. As much as I'd love to say, oh, it's changing slowly, it isn't really. So if you're doing certain things, it will set you apart. So even just having a structured job search. So when it's a market where hiring slows down, it's that time of year, or it's a difficult market, having a structured job search is really the first step. And then you can identify what industries you're interested in, and from there you can kind of move into those areas. So it can be things like following people in certain industries, and like setting it up, say over the next month I'm going to attend X number of free webinars, joining groups. So if you are on LinkedIn, there are some LinkedIn groups that are specific to certain areas. Like there's it gets really specific, like men over a certain age in finance, all in the same group, or women focused on diversity that love this, or whatever it is.
Men over the age of 50s in finance who wear dresses.
Right, there you go. So you can find it all.
Market these days.
Exactly, you can find it all. You can find it all on LinkedIn. You can. So things like that can help. So it's not just for network. I know I say LinkedIn, it's not just for networking, but you can look at articles and things like that. Get used to looking at trends. So industry trends, daily trends. And there are some industries generally that are growing. It's of course tricky because I don't know what each person is looking for, but anything e-commerce and digital transformation, that sounds a little outdated to me because the internet exists, but it still is growing in certain areas, and it will until we don't use the internet anymore. And I unless something drastic changes with AI, then I think that's the case. AI is another one. I think it would be difficult to disagree that AI is a growing industry, and targeting those is just about using those keywords because they're so broad and it can depend on what might pique your interest in those areas. Content creation is a big one. I'm sure that's something we can all relate to, but that's growing. So even if some people are just live streaming them job searching and that is getting millions of views, people can relate to it. They want someone in the background that feels like that person's going through the same pain. So that's a growing area. Just anything in I guess sustainability and climate, that's up and down as to whether that's at the forefront, but that is a growing area. So I'd say, one of the things I do personally just to keep my eye out of what's changing and what industries are coming up is just general videos, but that's because I have a personal interest in what's going to happen with AI and things like that. But even if you're not majorly interested, every now and then just looking at videos on those topics can kind of spark ideas. And then it helps you to say, well, actually, I want to target, say a coding job, or I want to target a freelance job. It can be something totally different. I want to do something like that. I want to start up something in e-commerce. And then from there, you can build a more structured job search. And there's loads of other places, hiring websites that you can look at, the popular ones like Glassdoor, Indeed, things like that. And there are certain career pages that can give you an idea of what sectors are actively hiring, like as a sector. You can look at number of jobs in a sector and if it's growing. Industry specific sites. So things like, say, TechCrunch for tech, or like Healthline for healthcare. There's loads of, pick the industry that you're interested in, bookmark those sites, take a look once a week. Influencers, this is not a plug for myself, but follow me if you want to. But for the industry that you're interested in, you can do that. Podcasts is another one. That's a big one. If you like podcasts in that format, that can work really well. And just popular business outlets. So places like Bloomberg and Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, they tend to cover things that are cutting edge that are coming up. So they can be good places to look. I'll stop now because there's just so many.
Well, it's interesting that because you're mentioning like AI and things and alignment and all this. And it's like, I was thinking kind of when you were saying that, I was thinking like, okay, well, if I was, I don't know, a tradesperson, like a mechanic, electrician, that kind of person, like, is this relevant to me? Because like, okay, I don't want to be a coder. I'm, this kind of thing. But then I thought a little further about it, and I thought like, well, what you could say is like, you mentioned AI. I mean, okay, you might not be an AI developer, but if you are aware of what AI is and you're aware of how it can help you in your job as a mechanic, simply, you're going to be answering, you're going to be like, for example, if you have to, I don't know, fix cars or something, you're going to have to be looking up, problem, like, okay, how do you, here's the symptoms, what could be the problem? What do I do, on this make and model with these symptoms? What could this be? And the old way was to flip through technical manuals. And I'm sure now, using some of these modern tools, if you upload a technical manual, you could ask ChatGPT or some equivalent of it. It's like, okay, well, if I got this on this model, what would it be? And then the AI would say, well, based on having analyzed the entire technical schematics of this product, I would look for this. And then if failing that, I would check this. Now, number one, you'd have to be receptive to doing this. You understand, and then aware enough of what AI is, what's actually going on here. And you have to just realize that it's an incredibly useful tool that can do things far more efficiently, or has potential to do things far more efficiently than the traditional tools. So, okay, I don't need you to be an AI developer if you're getting a job as a mechanic, but if you convince me, if I'm the general manager running a garage or something and I need to hire a mechanic, if you can convince me that, first of all, you're aware of some of these AI tools out in the wider world and you've used them before and you're receptive to them and you're excited about how they could make your job a little bit more efficient, that would be something that would hold a lot of value to me. I know you're not going to be some person who's going to shun all the latest technical tools under the guise that, oh, that's newfangled stuff. It's, I don't use that. I stick with the tried and true. I don't want that as an employer. I want someone who's more on board with this. So it's not that, this is only relevant if you're looking for a job as a coder or something. This could be relevant across the board, if only to display your awareness of it and your receptiveness to or embracing it in the future, something like that. So I think that, and I think that would apply with all the different things that you said, about the environmental stuff and all this, how you dispose of your garbage, in the garage. You don't pour antifreeze on the ground. You put it in this place because of this theory behind it. So I do think that a lot of what you said is relevant across the board. More than I think a lot of people realize.
Yeah,
you might
I think that's a good point.
Apply.
Yeah, I think it's the theme of what you mentioned is being open to what is modern and then demonstrating that. And that's the key when it's harder. So if you're in the job market and things are harder and hiring is slowing down, demonstrating that you are open and that you understand what is out there and how it affects what you do in general is really important. And that I 100% agree that that's something that employers look for. So yeah,
like young people, this is kind of a no-brainer, right? Like, yeah, you're down with all the latest stuff. Yeah, you've heard of all this stuff. Try to find someone in their 50s who's highly experienced, who's got, like really knows how to do all the technical stuff. That's also fully informed and fully receptive to a lot of the things you mentioned. I think that's a tougher thing to find and not as straightforward as I think a lot of people would imagine. They might put it on their resume because they think, oh yeah, it's kind of trendy and what people want to hear. But is it like, how deep does it go? And, that's something that someone could ask in an interview.
Yeah.
With just saying like, how would you apply AI to, make your job more efficient? I mean, do they have like, I got 5 answers for you right there. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, or is it like, well, I don't know, right. So I really think that's a valid point, and that can give younger people an edge over perhaps more experienced older people. or it could give older people an edge over their counterparts, distinguishing them by having a deeper understanding of these things. I think that's quite an interesting thing that you brought up there that has a lot of implications.
But I think in most cases, kind of along those lines, if I'm applying to a job and the job description says nothing about AI, I'm probably not going to be blindsided with a question about AI during the job interview process. So that's why it's also really important to go back and reread the job posting before you have your interview and use it to try to determine what sorts of questions might be asked. You can be ready for that. Sure, there might be the, out of left field question that comes through, but in most cases, the job description or job posting that you've applied to gives you enough hints on what you should be preparing for that upcoming interview.
Yeah, true. But I think just to kind of engage with you on this, Abby, something that you've mentioned, I believe a couple times in the past was we were talking about, I think you mentioned the company's values and stuff and how that would come up in a job interview. I think it might have been for the question, what do you know about our company? Mm-hmm. And then you would say, oh, well, I know you have these values, right? Now, Amri mentioned, the environmental stuff or the diversity stuff. And it's like, there you go. That's the segue, how that would get in, even if it's not mentioned in, a job description, but it could come in that way, So I still think it's really relevant and useful for people to have thought about this stuff, even if you don't think it's technically relevant to your specific job or your specific role, you know what I mean? Maybe you work in a company, they're not preaching diversity every day, it's not like really it's kind of below the radar, but, and you work as a mechanic and it's not directly related to your job or something. You don't work in HR, but I still think that's interesting. That's something that would come into a job interview. It can give you an edge and it can be a liability if you really don't know anything about it. And you're interviewing for an employer who really values that stuff,
Absolutely. Which is why then going even deeper into, reviewing their website, reviewing their social channels to see what sorts of things they're, populating and looking at employees' LinkedIn profiles to see what sorts of things they're engaged in can give you that edge, because that not only shows that you're kind of with the times and interested in staying on top of trends and, actively doing your own research on that, but then how does it apply to the company that you're applying and interviewing with?
Yeah, I think a great way that you can do that is a quick cheat way as an interview coach from going into interview coach mode. But I've never heard of anyone being penalized for just adding that in and saying it straight. There are some things you can't just say outright, so you have to wait for the question. But even if it's to tell me about yourself, so what made you apply, you can add in, oh, this is what made me apply. I've always loved this industry, blah, blah, blah. You go through a couple of relevant things and you say, and you can just say, and some of the ways I stay up to date with industry trends are, I actually attended this seminar online, or I actually watched this video in my personal time, or, even though I'm a mechanic, even though I'm something that is not in this is, I saw something about how this would help me update my job. And I can almost say, quote me, you will never be penalized for that. That can only ever work in your favor. Even if it isn't, you can just add it as a quick 1 or 2 sentences and then let them explore if they want to. That would not hurt in an interview. So I would agree that keeping up to date with industry trends, it's not necessarily something that is going to be critical for you to include. Don't rack your brains trying to remember that. But if you are kind of getting to the point where you're getting more comfortable in interviews, it will never hurt you to just say that I keep up to date in this industry unprompted, because it just shows initiative and it also shows interest beyond what every other candidate is saying. So, unless at a senior level, then you would expect commercial acumen and a bunch of other stuff. But generally speaking,
well, and I think that staying up with those industry trends also demonstrates your adaptability and flexibility. And those are things that all employers really value. So, while you don't necessarily have to mention it during an interview, if you can just drop a little nugget in there, that will certainly give you a little bit of extra bonus points, I think.
There's a question here. It says, hi, I can put these up. I can put these up on the screen here. There we go. So, hi, should resume have an achievement section? This is kind of a parallel to when someone was asking if they should have a skill section. I brought some of the achievements for example, highest distinction on my master's under the education section. What do you guys think? Should a resume have an achievement section?
I've seen great resumes. So I keep saying CV because I'm in the UK, but I see great resumes with and without achievement sections. It just depends on how it's done. Some people include their best achievement at the top of each role, their top 3 at the top or bottom of each role. They include a section. It can be done in all ways. I have a personal preference, which is I like anywhere between 1 to 3 top achievements for each role, as long as it doesn't make the CV too long. If it does, you can put them within the text of what you've done in the role. But in my opinion, there's no set answer to that. It depends on your resume, what you're going for, and a number of other variables.
Yep. And I just worked with someone this morning when it came to, advice on resumes, and you're going to get, no matter who you ask, you're going to get different opinions on what you should do on your resume. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. But I agree. I think having an achievements section or accomplishment section on its own isn't necessarily the most effective use of space. So I think integrating it within each of your work experience sections would be more effective, because you can really highlight the results that you achieve for that specific role, which I think that recruiters and hiring managers are likely more interested in. And so in your case, having the highest distinction for your education in that education section makes sense to me.
Yeah, I don't think there's any real rules on what sections you should have or not have. Like Abby just mentioned, everyone's got their own little technical preferences, but as long as you are including the things that whoever is reading it, if it's an ATS system or whatever the employer is looking for, and the employer has already kind of said a lot of things that they're looking for in the job description. So, I mean, as long as you mention them and they're reasonably prominent in your resume or your application, whatever you're sending in, I think that's the critical thing, right? I mean, there was some discussion earlier about, should you put this in a resume or should you put it in a cover letter? Once again, I think everyone's going to have their own sort of take on that, but I would put it in both. I mean, if it was just me, just my way of doing it, I'm sure some people might disagree with me, but as long as the important stuff is there and it's prominent, that's kind of the key.
And it's hard, because sometimes I might think that an achievement is something that really belongs on my resume, but if it's not relevant to the job I'm applying to, then I shouldn't include it. Because I really do want to make sure that I'm using my space most effectively, thinking of it as that valuable real estate. I only have about 6 seconds the first time someone looks at my resume to really show them how I'm the most fit or the best candidate for this role. Yeah. And so even though I might think that, XYZ achievement belongs on my resume, there might be something else that's a better fit for that space.
I see that a lot, by the way. That's another thing is people you're very proud of something, put it on, you really want to put it on your resume. You have to think really critically about whether or not the person reading your resume would be interested in that. Just have to add that in, because I see it so often.
Yeah, that's probably the single biggest misapprehension that a lot of job seekers are struggling with, because as you say, they're very proud of something. It really is an achievement in absolute terms, but it's maybe something that they're applying for a job, and the job they're applying for, that employer hasn't said, we're looking for this. We regard that as a good thing, right? So if they haven't explicitly mentioned it, chances are that they don't place a lot of value on it. So what you should have front and center on your resume or your application is the things they said we're looking for. So it doesn't matter what section you put it in too much, or whether it's on the cover letter or the resume, but it should be there. And you might be super proud of an educational qualification, or some achievement, or some role you were in, or something like that, and you really want that to be featured prominently in what you send in, your resume or your application, your cover letter. And the problem is that you might be very proud of it, but they're not asking for it. And it's very hard for people. Like, the ego is a very powerful thing. It's hard for you to minimize it or remove it from your resume.
Yeah.
I mean, would you remove it? Personally, I think sometimes it does count against people, because it's regarded as watering down the things that you do have that were asked for.
Yes, a lot of my advice is about removing things. That's a lot of my advice is centered around removing things from your resume. And it's really hard to see when it's your own resume and it's subjective. But so things I often see are things like achievements. It is around achievements that are not really relevant in any way to the role. And sometimes it's things like someone's going for a role that could at any level, and they want to put down that they started a company, whether it worked out and they're still doing it on the side or not. I see that a lot, and that is one of the main things. I'm like, you're gonna have to take that out. There's so many ways that could work against you. There's just so many ways, and it often does over, thinking someone's going to get bored. Sometimes intimidation. The person coming up says, "Oh, this person is used to running their own company," and it's not always like that, but it can look like that. So
see, that's a very interesting point to me, because the way I look at things, I interpret that as like, it's almost like you're exposing a little bit of the hypocrisy, because on the one hand, employers, they don't want a candidate who has started their own company. The implications of that are usually interpreted as, oh, you're the type of candidate that is going to go off and do their own thing. You've done it in the past. That tends to suggest you will likely do it in the future. And if you're working here, we don't want your loyalties divided between you serving us and you going off and starting your own company on the side. We don't want people to have their own, operations on the side. That's you're splitting your loyalties.
Yeah.
There could also be other issues for us. You could be taking some of our IP or, whatever, right? Like there's issues there. You could be stealing some of our customers. I mean, we don't know. So we're going to play it safe and not employ people that are likely to go off and start their own business on the down low, right? But the problem is that, people who start companies are very, very capable people. Whether you start one and it fails or you start one and it succeeds. Obviously, if you can start one and it succeeds, then, you're even more valuable, but you're very capable, but you're probably not going to want to work for somebody else if you can start your own thing. So those the incredible skills involved, like you have people that are strong in operations and sales and customer service and communication, and in order to get something off the ground, right? But it's almost career suicide if you put that on your resume, in my opinion. If you say, "Oh, I've started my own companies and I've started a couple of my own companies," even worse, right? What do you guys think of that?
Well, I think one way to get around that is you can put your company name on your resume, and then not give yourself the title of founder or president or whatnot. You can change it. So that's actually what I've done on my resume with my business. So instead of calling myself founder or whatnot, I just title myself as a coach and a consultant. So it looks like I'm employed with a different company. And so that's one way you can kind of get around it. And I think that this also kind of feeds into our conversation about what to do when the work slows down. If I'm maybe engaging in remote or freelance work where I'm maybe working as a contractor or kind of temporarily taking on projects. I think there's definitely ways that you can frame that work to help support why you're going to be a good fit for a position. I do think that there's this underlying bias that if you're not going to be fully dedicated to our company in this role, then we don't want you. And at the same time, having that intrapreneur attitude where you are, really ready to face challenges head on. You can think creatively, you can innovate, you can collaborate. If you can really present it in that way as being beneficial for the organization, then I think people can buy into that too.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's great. A great tip in terms of changing the position. That's a good one that I've recommended before, is you don't need to put that you were you can list what you did without actually having the title of creator and founder and starter. It can be something else to help you appear as more attractive to the employer that you want.
That makes sense. We are coming up to the hour mark, and I know that there's a couple of things that have to happen there. Do we want to try and quickly sort of get through? Did we cover everything on the agenda? I think there's still a few things to go through.
There's the positive, staying positive. I mean, I don't mind going over by saying about more, let's say 5 to 10 minutes, I don't mind. I'm
Okay,
happy
well,
to do that.
let's see if we can wrap some of these up, and at least we
Yeah.
address the big pillars of this here.
I think really just like the final point is for people who are experiencing this slowdown in hiring or feel like they're applying to jobs and they're just not getting any responses or they're not seeing any of the job postings that are relevant to them. The very final tip that we wanted to chat about was techniques for staying positive and building resilience. You know, this is one of the hardest things about applying to jobs is that you're going to probably get several rejections and maybe more than several. You're going to get a lot, especially if you're just like waiting for that first yes. So there's a lot of resilience that is required when it comes to applying to jobs just in general, but particularly when it slows down. So Amri or Bill, any like off the cuff thoughts when it comes to how you can build your own resilience and keep that positive attitude?
Yeah, I mean, one I'm going to steal from you, Abby, which you said in the past is about focusing on what you can control. Presented as my own tip, but no, I think that is a key. Is worrying, especially when you're on that hamster wheel of being in a job search. So just focusing on what you can do and worrying about that and not getting too caught up in what came before. So nothing boosts positivity like getting results. And there are certain things that will help you see results, like the focusing on what you can control, and also the basic things that I say about like the interview prep, practicing out loud, knowing the job description, and knowing your resume. And knowing the company. Those are three things: knowing your resume, knowing the company, knowing the job description. They sound so basic, but the volume of people that don't do them is staggering. So and when you start to get results from doing that, you will feel more positive. So, you know, also celebrating your wins. I've said it before, but just if you set yourself a goal, I'm going to apply to 1 job a week or 3 jobs a day, making sure that you are keeping track of that and realizing you are getting through a lot of work and you're getting closer and closer to your goal every time that you do that. And then one thing also is negative content. It can be really easy to get caught up in negative content. So like true crime, dystopian stuff, I sometimes do that, you know, and just negative news. And just trying to focus on things. It sounds a bit silly, but like anything lighthearted that you like, whether it's comedies, whether it's, you know, animated kid stuff, whatever, trying to keep lighthearted information coming in. That's really, really important. And then just with one last thing on resilience is for some reason, I'm getting this a lot. I've had this twice this week, 2 people saying, I'm not going to attend my interview because somebody watched my video and then felt very overwhelmed. And they were like, oh my God, I realized that I haven't prepared after watching your video. So now I'm not going to go. And I'm like, please don't do that. You're throwing away a learning opportunity. You're throwing away the option of 1, you doing really well and getting the job. And 2, you learning what you need to do in your next interview. So just in terms of resilience, understand that it is normal to feel like that, push through it and take every single opportunity so that you can use it to find out what works and what doesn't. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that's all great. Everyone needs to understand you come across less nervous than you actually are, and you do better than you think you do. That's kind of a universal thing. Just for this process, I think a lot of people have a problem with it. First of all, just the rejection, obviously, but because they don't understand what this process actually is. If you've ever worked as a salesperson and then you have to do this process to find a job, you will recognize this entire process because this is the sales process. It's a numbers game. You are selling yourself. It's like going door to door, you know, knocking on doors, right? And the idea is that, first of all, if a job gets 100 applicants, how much does it get these days? 1,000? If it gets 100 applicants, you statistically have a 1% chance of getting that job. If it's got 1,000 applicants, you got statistically a 0.1% chance of getting a job. You're going to be rejected. Everybody is going to be rejected. So get used to it. It has no bearing on how employable you are or what value you have to offer. You know, and what's going on is a company is saying, hello, we're looking for this very specific thing. We're looking for someone who's got all of these things, most of which we've told you about, but some of which we haven't told you about in the job posting. We're kind of keeping that under our hat, right? But we know we're looking for it, but we're not going to tell you we're looking for it. And we're not looking for all these other things. That's just us. Sorry, we're not looking for that, right? It could be ridiculous, but that's how it is. And you apply for it and you don't measure up in the sense that they haven't selected you. And, you know, what are the odds that just you happen to have exactly what these people are looking for? It's pretty low odds, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, if you apply for 30 jobs, you apply for 50 jobs, you apply for 100 jobs, you apply for 1,000 jobs, sooner or later, just by random chance, serendipitously, you're going to happen to fit somebody, requirements exactly. And you showed up at the right time, saying the right thing for them. And then, you get a bite, you get an offer, and you haven't changed. It's the employer that changed, right? So you just got to keep going through enough employers to find the one that is just happens to be looking for exactly what you have. Yeah. And, along the way, the better you are at being a communicator, great. The better you are at doing a resume, great. But it's a process of random chance. It's a numbers game. That's what it is. So don't get too down. Like, this is the process. Everybody's going to be rejected. Albert Einstein would be rejected if he did this. He'd be rejected 1,000 times before he got hired, if he did get hired at all. So don't worry about it too much.
Well, I think we have to remember to not take things personally. When I am rejected from a job, it's not because they didn't like me. It's because I just wasn't the best fit for the role. And there was probably someone else who demonstrated how they were a better fit for the role.
And their role might have been really stupid. You don't know, right?
Yeah. Bullet dodged in some way. So
exactly.
I think there's, that like personal thing. Like, in most cases, people aren't doing things to us. We just happen to be in this situation, and rejection is part of that process. And so having more of a positive mindset about, okay, how is this a learning opportunity? Maybe taking a little bit of initiative can also help build that resilience when it comes to following up. Like, I'm rejected. I'm really disappointed about that. And do they have any feedback or advice for me on how I could do better, or what I could improve or do differently for the next time? Yeah. We want to make sure we don't burn bridges with people because we're so sick of the rejection. Yeah. I have a personal experience where we offered the job to someone. They said, yes, but I'm actually waiting for a different job. And we were like, okay, this person, if they work out, great, but we're going to continue our job search. And we then found someone else who was a better fit. We rescinded the original offer and extended an offer to the second person who we found. The person who rescinded us, like, that we rescinded the offer from,
that initially didn't go over well, did it?
They didn't. They were like, I actually decided I did want to work for you. And we're like, well, it was just kind of just like, it wasn't personal. It's not that we're like trying to be mean to you, but we also have a role that needs to be filled. Yeah. And we can't wait around for 3 weeks for you to make this choice. And so it's not personal. It just is what it is. And so keeping a really positive relationship with the people that are going through this process with you is also beneficial, because maybe someone does fall through and they come back to you, who they initially rejected, and said, we actually have this position. Are you interested again? But they're probably not going to follow up if you curse them out or sent them an email with, all caps writing and things like that. So we want to make sure that we don't burn those bridges, keep our options open, and look at it as like a learning opportunity rather than a true rejection of us as people.
We've gotten a few questions here. I want to put them up on the screen and give Amri the chance to respond to them before she has to leave. So let's do this right here. So, age discrimination question. 3.5 years experience working directly in HR, 17 years ago. I've been working in payroll, earned my bachelor's in HR and a PHR certification. Should I delete the old experience?
Well, I guess it would depend on what you want to do now. So it depends. I'm guessing that you want to stay in HR, and I assume move into a more senior role. If you've got HR experience in the past, I would not recommend deleting that experience. Just whatever came in between that was irrelevant, narrow that down to like just a couple of bullet points, 2 or 3 bullet points per role, or summarize that if it was all in the same industry, and make that experience of 3.5 years more prominent. Just make sure that you fill out the specifics of what you did in that role. But no, I wouldn't recommend deleting the old experience if you've got relevant experience, unless you feel that it is an issue of you don't want other types of discrimination, so you don't want it to look like you did it too long ago. If that is the case, then that's fine. But let's say you're going for an HR director's role or something, then no, that's fine. It's very common for people at a more senior level to have loads of background. So it depends on what you're going for, but that would be my advice.
Yeah, and I would say in most cases when it comes to HR is one of those different types of industries that like people fall into because there's a lot of transferable skills for HR. So if you are worried that if you put that work experience from 17 years ago on your resume, there are other ways to show that you have similar skills in those roles that might not be HR related. And it's clear that like working in payroll is sometimes an HR function. You have your bachelor's degree in HR, you have your PHR certification, like all of those things are probably more recent than the 3.5 years of experience from 17 years ago. So I think it's up to you. If you're worried that it's going to happen, then test it out, see what happens if you don't include it, and see what happens if you do include it.
That makes sense. We've got another one here. Let's see. Youssef says, I'm a gas engineer in the Algerian desert, and I have a problem. Here we go. With a racist American manager. And then they changed her position after I filed more than 20 complaints to the state. Okay, does that go on? Yes, it does. Here we go. I think that this type of it has become a kind of racism, unlike our older generation who sits with you for an hour, drinks coffee with you, and talks a lot to learn about your abilities. I don't know if there's much you can say about this one, but does anyone want to take this?
Well, I assume that this person is referencing the modern day interview. I mean, in terms of what he's describing, it sounds like he's talking about the interviews that were less formal and structured, and now they're more formal and structured, and they use that to say, actually, you're not suitable in these areas, but it's just kind of covering their own back. So has there been discrimination in interview processes? Yes. Has that been proven? Yes, many times over. But in terms of the new structure, I think there was an idea behind it of making sure that it was more fair. So if I sit down with a coffee for somebody, with someone and say, oh, I like this person personally, then it becomes more about that than it does the skills. So there's pros and cons to old and new styles of interviewing. That's what I would say. It just depends on what you're experiencing. So if you're experiencing discrimination because of the new modern style, then I guess that would be something that's hyper specific to what you're experiencing. But yeah, that'd be my answer to that.
Okay, and I think we have one final one here. Mike, as a recruiter, do you give feedback to a candidate whom you did not get a job and ask, what does he need to improve? I don't know if I can parse the grammar on that one, to be honest with you.
Saying that, someone that, do you give feedback to a candidate who didn't get the job if they ask what they need to improve? That's how I'm interpreting that.
Okay, so every candidate gets feedback, but it depends on the stage that they go through. So no, not all candidates will get feedback on what they need to improve. Sorry, if they ask for it, then yes. So if a candidate asks for that, then yes. However, if the candidate hasn't gone through an interview stage, it's very difficult to give that feedback, because it may just be something as simple as you were not initially shortlisted because these specific skills were missing from your resume, which is normally the case if you didn't get to an interview. So if you've interviewed and you've asked for feedback, then yes, I as a recruiter would give you that feedback. But it really depends on what the process is for that role. So sometimes if it's a customer service role, it could be that there's a 5-minute interview first as a screen, and then they go into an assessment center. So it's really different. But yes, if somebody asked that question, the short answer is yes, that they would get feedback on what they need to improve. It's so important and it's so easy to give. I don't know why some recruiters don't do that, but yes, I do.
I would agree that if it's asked, then for sure give that feedback. With most applicant tracking systems, it's like you can click some boxes and say all these people are not going to move forward, so they all get a generic email. Yeah. And so they're probably not offered feedback initially, but if someone were to proactively reach out and ask for that additional feedback, if we've got it, I think it's morally and ethically up to us to provide it. Yeah. There are some people who just won't do it, though.
That makes sense. We keep getting more questions, which is great. But is there any final word that you guys have for this topic, which is getting hired, getting a job when hiring slows down? We covered several aspects of that today. Any final word from anyone on this?
I just put a link to a video in the chat really quick. Someone asked CM, said, what should you say is the reason you're leaving a company? I have a video on that topic. So I just put it in the chat for that person to watch.
Oh,
okay, perfect.
I think that as a quick summary, it's because my tips don't change that much. It's just just impressing on others that this does need to be done, and it will normally put you over the edge of other people. So really just the things that I said earlier about the job description, knowing the job description, knowing the company, knowing your resume. And I mean, really just taking the time. It's a little painful, but you only really need to do it once you know this. It's so much easier. And also just, I think Abby's advice on not taking things personally, I would also agree with that advice is because hiring is slowing down, it is going to feel very personal sometimes with rejections and things. And also because the job market is difficult, it's taking 3 or 4 times as long. However, the resilience and the perseverance is key. Yes, it's coming up to December, but that a lot of people stop searching during that time, so there's actually less competition. And it also there are managers that need to fill their roles by the end of the year for budget related reasons. So December in my past has been actually a great month because a lot of people stop looking, but there's still a lot of roles out there. So there's always just the way that my brain works. I'm like, oh, what's the silver lining here? So please do keep looking, please stay positive. It's not personal. Yeah, that would end.
I was going to mention that too. Yeah, the hiring or job seeking slows down, like you were saying, in December. So that can give people an edge too. So I wouldn't stop looking necessarily just because it's December or it's the end of the year or anything like that. So yeah, I agree. Right. Well, I believe Amri has to jet. So thank you for joining us, Amri. It's always a great conversation when you're around.
Thank you so much for inviting me again. Yeah, it's been lovely catching up. All right.
Yeah, and we will be back. I think Abby and I might just stay. I'm interested to just answer a couple of these questions, but we will be back. I'm here every Monday, and hopefully Amri will be joining us again soon, maybe in about a month's time. And I think Abby, you and we have another one scheduled. So
we do.
Is it next Monday? I think that you and I are on again, or is it
next Monday or the Monday after? I don't remember exactly. Like but we are scheduled again too.
Yeah, hopefully we'll be able to do this where everyone has multiple people, and then everyone will always be around. So excellent. Thank you for everybody who participated. Thank you to Amri. Thank you to Abby. Thank you to everybody participating. You guys are awesome. We'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Amri.
All right. So I see another chat that came in that says, I want to know why a candidate can even apply for like 100 times in different companies, but never receive any call or message. I think that in that case, it's probably just the culture of the organization. And maybe it's to me, that would be a red flag to not apply to that company anymore.
I think that's quite a typical experience, I think.
Yeah. And I think, we all, again, comes down to like feeling like if it's personal or not personal. If I've applied to 100 jobs at the same company and I never receive any responses back, that could be one thing. With the federal government here in the United States, it's a huge organization with many different people in recruiting. And like, that's just part of the process is to apply 100 times and never get any responses back. So I don't know. It really depends. I would say that whoever the HR recruiter is, or the person who's responsible for the job, they might have different ideas on how to handle that situation. Many times it's easy enough to send a simple rejection email through your ATS system, and some companies don't utilize that. And it can be really frustrating and demoralizing when you are applying and putting in all this effort, but you're not getting any responses back. I think if you felt like you've applied to 100 jobs and you can quantify that and you're not getting any response, then maybe it's time to take a look at your resume and your application process to see if there's maybe something that's going wrong there. In most cases, when I'm working with someone who is experiencing something similar, it's because they're not tailoring their resume to the job. It's just a generic resume, and the applicant tracking system is kind of skimming over them and not selecting them as someone who has the qualifications. And so it does take effort.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. It's that's a number one takeaway for a lot of people. You've got to be customizing your resume. I know it's what nobody wants to hear because it's a ton of work, especially if you've gotten into the habit of applying for like a million jobs every day because you're using the same resume just over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But I would wager a guess that you're not getting a lot of bites. And if that is also the case, like Abby says, the problem is probably that you are not tailoring your resume. If you tailor your resume, yes, it's work. Yes, it takes extra time. You can't apply for 1,000 jobs in a day or 1,000,000 if you were doing that. But the ones you do apply for, you'll have much higher likelihood of getting a response if they're not like fake jobs, right? That's the other thing, right? We haven't really touched on that. That could be another reason if you're applying for jobs on aggregators like Indeed, and they look like a lot of those red flags we've talked about previously are there.
Yeah.
That could be an issue too. So learn about those.
Yep. And I think that is also personally a very good idea to reach out to someone if you can, once you've submitted an application. So I have a video on how to apply to federal jobs with the US government. And there's in the application, or I guess the job posting, it gives you the contact for the person who's responsible for managing that application. And I think it's personally, oh my gosh, it's completely acceptable to reach out to that person directly, even if you don't get a response from them, because just seeing your name pop up and them quickly skimming through your email might give them the opportunity to take a second look at your application. And so if you have some sort of contact that you can reach out to, whether it's on LinkedIn or someone that you know who works for the company, or you can get in touch with HR in general, just taking that a little bit extra effort to make that connection can be beneficial too.
I agree. Carmiego is here. I recognize Carmiego. Thank you for being here. Here's another one. CM. I went to an interview and my references supply statements because they asked and they never got back to me. I reached out and they said I didn't get the position. This felt very rude. Okay. Once again, I'm having a bit of trouble understanding the grammar in the middle there.
I think what it's saying is that went through the interview process, was asked to go to the references stages. The references put in the effort to give references and then ghosted from the hiring team. And that felt rude. But you then reached out and then they said, oh, you didn't get the position. I agree. That does feel rude. I think if you're going to go through the process of asking other people to provide references, then it's the least you can do from a hiring manager or recruiter perspective to close the loop on that and let the person know that they're not being selected for the position. And it's kind of my personal preference to do it that way. And just because you and I might agree that that's the more professional way to handle that, it doesn't necessarily mean people will always do that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know precisely what happened, but it could have been that they called references and you never know, there could have been a bad reference. Now, if that was the case, and that's a big if, but if that was the case, maybe this employer decided not to discuss the matter with you and not say like, well, we called your references and one of them said that you were a jackass. It's like, they wanted to avoid that conversation. And maybe that's what happened there. I'm not sure. So just also make sure that your references are indeed giving you good references. A good thing to do is before you list them as references, make sure you talk to each of these people personally and say, I'd like to list you as a reference. Is that okay? And then you could explicitly say to them, would you feel yourself able to give me a good reference? So that if they say, well, I don't know if I could really do that, then before any of these kind of kerfuffles take place, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. Maybe that's what happened. Who knows? It's kind of unclear what they did.
Yep. And there's a lot of reasons why things might be happening. And I think it's still best practice from a recruiter perspective to close the loop on that. And that still sometimes doesn't happen.
Here's one I'm going to let you tackle there, Abby.
So how do you decide it's time to get a career coach? Well, it's personal preference. I think when you feel like you've done a lot of things on your own and you haven't been getting the results that you're hoping to achieve is probably a time to reach out to someone else who can give you a different perspective. Now, in the US, we've got workforce centers, which I highly recommend if budget is a issue for you, if you just don't have the funds to pay for a private career coach, because it can get pricey. And so I think it also comes down to knowing what you want and what you're looking for. I'm the type of career coach who doesn't do work for people. People will sometimes come to me and they want me to write their resume for them. That's not the type of work that I do. People come to me and they want me to do the job search for them and find them jobs to apply to. That's not the type of work that I do either. And so you want to have a realization that you might need some extra input from someone, maybe a different perspective or some additional resources that you weren't aware of. And then also know what type of outcomes you're looking for. What do you want this person to do with you? The type of career coaching that I do is much more supportive. I do kind of like brainstorming with people from a general career coaching perspective. I provide them with a lot of resources. I help them set goals. I can check in with them and be that kind of accountability partner for them. But I'm not going to do the job search for them or apply to jobs for them or write their resume for them. So going back to what I had mentioned about the workforce centers in the United States, these are all over. They are usually receive federal funding and sometimes state funding. They're located, at least where I am in Colorado, within the county that you live in. And they have a lot of great free resources, including career coaches on staff who can go through your resume with you, talk about the application process, your job search process. They have assessments that you can take so you can, identify what types of work might be the best fit for your skills and your interests. They also have free classes on upskilling, like Microsoft Excel and how to use different programs and things like that. So I'd recommend looking into some of those free resources first, like your workforce center. And then if you want even more specialized experience from someone who's going to be able to do some one-on-one specialized coaching, that's when you can then look into someone like me who would be able to help you with goal setting, structuring your process, how to create like a tracker to, set goals on how many jobs to apply to and things like that.
Makes a lot of sense. Let's see here. We've got another one here. Mike says, I had several interviews and I was rejected. Some recruiter told I was overqualified. I guess that's it. What do you think I should change? It's the overqualified comment. I've got my own thoughts on this, but you're probably more qualified than I am to answer this when it comes from a recruiter, Abby.
Yeah, well, and when it comes to being overqualified, it probably depends on what you put on your resume. So sometimes people will say you're overqualified if there's some age discrimination at play because they see that there's a lot of work experience. And then other times you truly are overqualified and they're just worried that you're not going to be a good fit for the role because you will want to move into something faster. So for example, I once was helping recruit for a paralegal role and attorneys were applying to that role. And the hiring manager for that role was saying, I do not want to hire anyone who's an attorney because I want someone who's going to be in this role more long-term and someone who is a trained paralegal and does not want to then, do an internal lateral shift into an attorney position. So there's probably several things at play.
Yeah. See, that's what I would have said for that. It's based on an assumption they've made. I don't think there's anything technically as being overqualified. I don't think that exists. Like what? You did a job when you were 20 years old, okay? And then you spent another 20 years climbing the ladder, doing other advanced things. And then for whatever reason, you want to get a job again, doing what you did when you were 20 years old. Are you overqualified for that? What does that mean? You can't do the job anymore? You could do it too well? What does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. What it means is that they're making certain assumptions about you based on stereotypes. One of the assumptions is, like Abby just mentioned, is that, first of all, you will not want to do it long term. Maybe you're desperate for a job now. You need money. So you're trying to do anything you could possibly do, right? And surely you can do this. You were doing this 20 years ago. You're perfectly qualified to do it, right? How could you not be qualified? But they're making the assumption that, well, the fact that you're here looking for this now, we assume that you're not really serious about doing this, really. So it might be a temporary thing for you. We're assuming you will jump ship very soon after we hire you, as soon as something better comes along, something that pays more. We're also making assumptions about your compensation expectations. You feel you'll want to be paid for the 20 years experience you have beyond this job, right? You won't be happy with the pay you made when you were 20 years old. So it's based on assumptions. So, for what it's worth, that's my opinion on this. It's really, there's no such thing as being overqualified. It's just the assumptions they're making about you, which is pretty hard to get away from.
Yep. And I just recently posted a video on like one of some concerns that could come up during the interview process. And that's one of them if you're overqualified. And so you can do, as a part of the interview process, kind of plant seeds ahead of time to let them know that even though you have this education or even though you have this experience, here's why I want this job, or here's why I'm a good fit for this job. What am I looking for out of this role? Maybe I have experience in the past where I was managing people and I had a lot of responsibility, and then I'm applying to an individual contributor job and they're wondering why I would want to do that. Well, maybe I actually don't like managing people and I want to be, more of a specialist in this role. I can strategically answer questions during the interview process to, in a roundabout way, answer that concern before it's even brought up.
Yeah, I see there's 4 more questions at present. I say we answer these 4 questions and then that'll probably be the cutoff right there.
Sounds good.
Because we've been here for about an hour and a half. So let's see here. Next one is our good friend Youssef says, luck also plays a big role. A person dresses beautifully and speaks well. These are things that should not be forgotten. I agree. That's not really more, that's a statement more than a question, but I agree with you.
Yep.
Art says, would someone with an MBA get the job over someone with a bachelor's? Not necessarily. Not if you're going through for a worker type job. It depends what they're looking for. And sometimes an MBA can count against you when people make assumptions. If you hire someone with an MBA for maybe a worker role, maybe the assumption is that you won't be happy in a worker role because you'll be the one wanting to make the decisions. You'll want to be the boss. And that will lead to a bunch of conflicts and you won't be a great fit for it in a worker role. So they'll just make that assumption about you and not bring you in to interview for a worker role. So it depends on the situation, depends what they're looking for and what the role is that you're applying to.
Yep.
Shay, so I want to know how a professional resume, especially for a waiter, should be structured to get hired. Because I did watch on YouTube, on Google, but still, I don't know what's the problem. I don't know if you can answer that one very comprehensively. You could just give the broad strokes, I guess.
Yeah, I think with these types of roles where it's more hospitality, you might have more results if you go in person. If I'm applying to a job to work in hospitality with a hotel or a restaurant or something like that, I might make a better impression handing my resume physically to someone and talking to them about the job and then going and applying online, because then they'll be trying to put my face and my name together. And so that's what I would recommend doing if it's in like the hospitality industry. When it comes to a professional resume, doing the like hospitality type thing, if you haven't done any work before, there's some ways that you can go about that, like creating a functional resume. So I would Google that functional resume, or there's the reverse chronological resume, which is more traditional. If you don't have a lot of experience, or feel like you don't have a lot of skills, then the traditional resume is probably not the best fit for you, but the functional resume is. But my first thought is if you're wanting to apply for a job to be a waiter, your best bet is probably going in person and handing a hard copy to someone and talking to someone at the restaurant or at the location where you're wanting to work, and then applying to the job.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think it goes beyond just the hospitality industry. A lot of things can really benefit for you doing it in person.
Yep.
Let's see here. We've got a couple more. What does it mean when you keep seeing the same job posted for 4 months? Probably a fake job, right?
Yes. Or they are not finding their unicorn and the hiring manager is being very specific. So there have been times, there are different types of jobs as well. So I've worked with companies where they use what's called an evergreen job, which is a job that's just kind of continuously posted. and it's for a bunch of different vacancies that fall under that same job title. So, for example, a teacher. Maybe I have a school and I'm wanting to hire 15 teachers. I'm just going to post one job, and it's going to have 15 then vacant positions associated with that one job posting. So maybe I hire 10 of them and I still have 5 vacancies. So that might be another reason why it's posted for 4 months. It might be an evergreen job. Other times, maybe it's been, I've forgotten to close it, or there are some deeper issues when it comes to not finding someone who's the right fit and being too specific.
Personally, I think that it's kind of a red flag. Like whatever may be going on behind that job. I guess, Abby, you kind of brought something up I never actually considered, which was the one job with multiple vacancies. Mm-hmm. But is that a common thing for from what you've seen? Does that happen on a regular basis?
For large organizations that have the same type of job. So, in my HR department, no, we have one job posting for one vacancy. But in our human services department, where we've got caseworkers, or in the schools where we've got 15 different types of teachers, then we might have more of those evergreen job postings where it's one posting and multiple vacancies are associated with it.
Yeah. See, I've seen that where that's been common when you have a company website and they just have their own, jobs listed on their website. So it's not actually being reposted or anything. It's just sitting there for months on end. Right. And, that's where you would have, they're always looking for talent. There's always, they can always use somebody's skills if they have certain combinations of skills. Yeah. But if it's being posted on an aggregator, like an Indeed or LinkedIn or something, over and over and over again for months, I don't know. To me, that would suggest more of a red flag than anything you'd want to pursue personally.
And I would say that it's also acceptable to reach out to the company and say, hey, is this job still hiring? And just ask, because then if they're like, oh, shoot, no, we meant to close that. It's been filled for 3 months. Don't apply to it. Then you haven't wasted your time applying to it. And then you might even get, that warmer connection with someone to say, oh, well, I was really liking to apply to this job, or hoping that I would be able to apply to a job that's similar to this. Here's my resume. If anything comes up, in the near future that looks like I might be a good fit, let me know.
But call them up. Call them up. Say, hey, what gives? In your best Sylvester Stallone accent, just ask them that really upfront and see what they say.
Yep. What's going on?
Okay, last question here before we sort of cut off. From Carmiego, what is the difference between a corporate mentor and one you can hire privately on your own? Is this only valid or normal for higher roles in a company? Corporate mentor, you mean within your employer? If you're working at a company and some other person is going to sort of take you under their wing or something. I've never really seen that officially as an official thing.
And I haven't really seen it as a paid thing. So that's what I'm getting stuck on, is one that you can hire privately on your own. In most cases, when I've worked with mentors or I've helped connect people to mentors, it's purely because there's mutual benefit that each person is getting out of this relationship. So there's not really any hiring that might be happening. Now, if you're wanting to hire a leadership coach to help you develop your leadership skills, then that feels a little bit different than a mentor. And so I would say that anyone can have a mentor and it can go in any direction. I might have reverse mentoring where I'm an older person who's wanting a younger person to teach me how to be a little bit more technologically savvy. I might have
you wear your baseball hat sideways, right? And you wear your pants down low. Yeah.
There's
stop, right?
Yeah. There's the mentoring that happens across the organization. So maybe peer-to-peer mentoring. And then there's your traditional mentoring, which is where I want to get knowledge and wisdom and insight from someone who has experience, then they can transfer that to me. But in most cases, I wouldn't say mentors are hired.
Yeah. It's weird because some external HR companies do provide services mainly for executives. They'll do mock interviews with you. They'll do all the psychometrics and all that kind, and they'll allow you the opportunity to practice it with them, those kind of things. They'll give you feedback. They'll work with you to be better at interviews and things like that. So, I mean, that definitely is a thing. I don't know what you call that. That just sort of like executive HR services,
Probably coaching of some sort, frankly, like executive coaching, leadership coaching, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Where they specifically work on like HR related stuff, like getting you hired, that kind of stuff. But within a company, it's not an official thing. Usually, like what's common, at least what I've seen a lot, is where someone will take, a senior manager will take a junior manager kind of under their wing, almost like they're being groomed to be their successor, right? And so you get to shadow them around. Here, let me show you what I do. You get to attend all my meetings with me. You get to see all the stuff I'm working on. I might explain what I'm doing to kind of like teach you. And the idea is that it's all under the guise of like sort of cross training. The company likes it too, because then, if somebody leaves or something happens to somebody, there's some failover, like other people are cross trained, right? So they can step into each other's roles and things like that. So, I mean, but that's not a super official thing. It's certainly not something you pay for. It's just part of the organizational, like what life, like whatever you call that, Yeah. I mean, I know some HR departments, they formally create programs for that, like for cross training and what do you call it, like succession planning and all that kind of stuff, where they say like, okay, you're the only, as far as we can tell, you're the only person who has this knowledge or these skills. You need to train someone so they can cover for you and this and that. I mean, that's semi-formal, I guess, right? Like they do write that up and they look at that stuff, at least in theory.
Yeah. Well, and I've just developed for an organization, help them develop a leadership development program. And one of the stages of this is having a mentor. And so from the process part, we've basically walked people through the steps on how to find their own mentor and make the decision of if this person is a good fit for me or not, based on what I'm wanting to learn and grow and develop my skills in. And so there are some more formal ones where you get paired with someone that it could be completely random where you get paired with them. It could be a little bit more informal where you're asked to be paired with someone. It could be informal from a perspective where I'm choosing to reach out to someone whom I admire or respect and see what sorts of insights they can provide me. So there's lots of different ways to go about that.
Yeah, there's some conflicting forces that complicate things. Like, knowledge hoarded is power. Knowledge shared is, you make yourself less important, less vital. And so that's a driving force between a lot of people's personal incentives versus what the organization wants. The organization wants everyone to be cross-trained and no one to have any unique knowledge or skill sets. And obviously that opposes, people's own personal incentives for making themselves more valuable and all this kind of thing. So that's why I venture a guess. That's why I've seen this stuff only done informally, really. You can't order someone, tell that person everything in a month, they need to be able to replace you. It's like, oh, sure, I'll get right on that, then you'll be able to replace me in a month. That's wonderful. So, you know what I mean? But that's how that stuff is kind of structured. If you want to pay for assistance, you would have to go to external HR companies that provide, like Abby says, like executive coaching is probably the best term I think that would be under. And that's where you'd find it, I imagine.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah. Whew. Okay. I think we've reached the end. We're going to sort of cut it off there. But we will be back. I really should memorize the schedule for this. I don't have the schedule memorized, but I think in a couple of weeks, Abby, we're back together doing this again. So check out Abby's channel. She's got a ton of very useful videos for job interviews, for resumes, for the entire job search process. If you're looking at like, what to do. And I also believe you talk a little bit about, sort of like the psychological element of like, what people were asking about today, how to sort of keep it together and focus on the right things. So check Abby's channel for that. There's a link. If you're watching this on my channel, there's a link in the description underneath this live stream that'll take you to her channel and you can check out some of these resources.
Yep. And if you're watching on my channel, I've also linked to both Bill's channel as well as Amri's channel, which he was with us earlier.
Yes.
lots of great resources when it comes to your overall like professional development and your job search.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you for the participants who are asking questions and making comments. That's great to see. I think we could just sustain this just by answering questions. That's the message I'm getting. I think we've got to that point. There are 25 people here watching live. Thank you for being here. Thanks to Abby. Thanks to Amri, who was here earlier.
Thanks,
And we
Bill.
will, yeah, and we will see you guys very soon. We'll have another episode next week, same time. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.